Welcome, everyone. I'm Gabriel Rockhill. I direct the Critical Theory Workshop, and I'm very excited today to have two guests from the Orinoco Tribune, which is an independent media outlet that provides news and analysis on Venezuela, Latin America, and the Global South. It was founded in 2018 and is known for its progressive perspective and critical coverage of U.S. foreign policy and imperialism. Of the two speakers, one is Jesús Rodríguez Espinoza, who is an expert in international relations, Venezuelan politics, and communication. We're also joined by Saheli Chowdhury, who is from West Bengal, India, who's studying physics for a profession, but with a passion for writing, and works a lot on history and popular movements from around the world, especially the Global South. I could think of very few more important topics that are necessary for people to understand today than the current war or intensification of war, I should say, by the US empire on Venezuela's right to self-determination. And so this collaboration with Orinoco Tribune is a unique opportunity to learn from two experts in the field about how best to understand the current situation in Venezuela. I will drop in the chat a link to the donations page for their platform, and I strongly encourage everyone to support it if they can. I also wanted to briefly mention that we have a few other upcoming events with the Critical Theory Workshop. The inaugural Society for Peace, Internationalism, and Ecology Conference will take place on the 18th of October. I'll drop the link to it in the chat. You can join in person or online. We also have a project that we've been working on with the International Manifesto Group around imperial resistance in the Sahel that will take place on the 9th of November. We have two book launches coming up with John Bellamy Foster and then myself. And we also just announced our summer school, so check all of that out online. I'll drop some of the links into the chat. But with no further ado, I will turn it over to our guests from Orinoco Tribune to share with us Orinoco Tribune to share with us some of the framing for how best to understand Venezuela today. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. We are so thanks. First of all, thanks a lot also for the platform that you are giving us, because we are actually trying to. The idea of Orinoco Tribune is to reach people, especially in the global north, with the information from Venezuela, and no, because we want them to understand so that they do not fall victim to the mainstream media narratives and fake news narratives that are built around Venezuela. So it's really, therefore, it's a really an important platform. So we have this slideshow. I'll just start sharing my screen, and well, we'll be good to go, I suppose. Okay, I think it's visible. Okay, I suppose it's visible, right? Okay, Jesus, it's your turn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jesús Rodríguez. I'm the editor of Orinoco Tribune, and Sahili and I prepared this slideshow based on an article that we wrote a few days ago, thinking on this particular webinar event. So Sahili and I will, be in charge of explaining each part of this slideshow. And Sahili, you can pass to the next slide. And this is basically what we are planning to let you know. We're going to have a small introduction, a brief history of U.S. aggressions against Venezuela. Go back, Sahi. And facts about U.S. military deployment in South Caribbean, the facts about Venezuela's response to this recent U.S. aggression, the position of the far-right opposition and its influence in the current events, the international and regional reaction, the expected and versus the real effects of this aggression on Venezuela, the unusual Chavista mainstream partial narrative alignment, and also to finish the fake U.S. war on drugs, versus the real fight against drugs. And then we're going to have a small closing, and that's basically what we plan to show you in the coming minutes. We're going to try to make it as brief as possible in order to allow you time to make questions. And we can pass to the next slide, Sahi. This is, I mean, in the previous one, okay. Basically, I'm going to begin with this introduction that to explain you that currently Venezuela is being threatened by the U.S. military and the U.S. empire with an unprecedented military deployment that we are going to explain soon, but is something that has never happened in recent history of U.S. imperial military deployments at least in this part of the world. And the excuse for this military deployment is what the gringos call the war on drugs. And that also happens simultaneously with the increase on the bounty on President Maduro for the capture, between quotations, of President Maduro that was raised from $15 million. That was something that has been there since 2019, I believe. But this year in January was increased to $25 million. And when this military deployment happened, a few days because it was announced, actually, that bounty was raised to $50 million. So that's part of the context of this, current situation. The economic and political situation in Venezuela is relatively, for our standards, is relatively stable. I mean, the economic situation in Venezuela has been improving for more than 4 years, despite the U.S. sanctions and the U.S. blockades. And that says a lot about the capacity of Venezuela to deal with U.S. sanctions and the new realignment, of the world, especially with the appearance of BRICS and these alignments that Venezuela has with BRIC countries like China, especially with China and Russia. So the economical situation is relatively good. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but it's way better than what we experienced in 2019, 2018. And in political terms, since the presidential elections last year, Chavismo has been increasing its dominance over the political spectrum in Venezuela, and peace has been, somehow being secure after the 2 days of violence that were promoted by far-right factors in Venezuela after the presidential election on August last year. So we have been experiencing like a year without political violence in Venezuela or violent protests and things like that. We call those protests guarimbas. And I'm planning this because far-right and the U.S., following the information from far-right groups in Venezuela, always talk about Maduro's weakness, that Maduro is about to fall, and they have been saying that for the last, 10 years at least. And with that, it's important to mention these new kinetic strikes announced by the U.S. empire that are basically extrajudicial killings of people in small boats that they say that carry drugs, but no one knows exactly what are the names of the people that has been killed, how they were killed, where they were killed. And we are talking now about 17 persons that even President Petro from Colombia said a few days ago in a tweet on social media that he believes that some of those 17 civilians might be Colombians also. So that's basically the framework in which the current events are happening. So we can pass to the next slide, Sahi.
Okay, so this history is nothing new. I mean, the thing that is happening now may look like it's huge. Of course, it's unprecedented, but the context for this has been, I mean, the ground for this has been prepared for more than a quarter century. So it started with the election of former President Hugo Chavez as the president of Venezuela in 1998. So he took the office in 1999 January. So, and starting from that moment onwards, there has been, like, the US has attempted to overthrow the government of Venezuela, because I mean, not just the government, it wants to overthrow what is called the Bolivarian Revolution that was initiated by Hugo Chavez and is now being continued by President Nicolas Maduro. So they want to just overthrow the entire system of governance, because the US does not believe in the right to self-determination of the peoples, their right to choose their own form of government. And I mean, recently we have been reviewing all the coup attempts that the Venezuelan people have suffered since the election of President Hugo Chavez in 1998. And we will just, I mean, we'll just go through the most important ones, or the biggest ones that happened during all this time. And there have been, I will say, there have been hundreds of attempts to overthrow the government. We'll only enumerate a few. So the first big one that happened was the April 2002 coup against President Hugo Chavez, in which he was actually deposed for 48 hours from, like, starting from 11th of April, and I mean, the coup was reverted by the people on 13th. Nevertheless, I mean, there were people killed in that time also. And nevertheless, just before, I mean, just after it finished, they started, I mean, the far right, local far right, in association or in support, complicity with the US and also from Colombia, because at that time we know the government of Colombia, I mean, it was Alvaro Uribe's reign in Colombia. So like, Venezuela was sort of surrounded from all sides. And I mean, just after the coup was reverted in 2002 April, they started the oil strike. That is at the time the heads, that the leadership of the state oil company, which is the Petróleos de Venezuela. So at the time, the leadership was actually, like, mostly, still the government was new, so everything was just from beforehand. So the people in those positions were the oligarchs. And they started, it was the bourgeois strike, or the oil strike was done by the bourgeoisie, not by the people of Venezuela. And it continued, like, from the end of 2002 and until the middle of 2003, causing a loss of billions of dollars, because the oil sector was and still remains the main economic engine of Venezuela. Thereafter, like, just after it was reverted in 2004, there was the first violent far-right protest in the streets. No, Jesus already mentioned that they are called guarimbas in Venezuela. And these far-right protests are basically targeted at killing as many people as possible, Chavistas, politically unaligned. It does not really matter. So that was that. And there was in 2006 and 2007, there are also similarly riots. In 2006, there was a constituent assembly and there was a riot surrounding that constitutional referendum. And after that, in 2007, it continued. Thereafter, just after the election of 2013, there was again the far-right protest of the guarimbas. Every time there is an election and the far-right loses, it refuses to recognize the elections results, and they start with a protest, and a violent protest. By violent, I mean violent is targeted at killing as many people as possible and causing as much destruction as possible. So in 2013, there was the guarimbas. Again in 2014, it was named La Salida, the exit, meaning that it was supposed to be an exit from the authoritarian communist government of Venezuela. And on the heels of the 2014 guarimbas, which was extremely violent, there came Barack Obama's executive order of 2015 declaring Venezuela an unusual and extraordinary threat to the US national security. And it was what opened the floodgates to the unilateral coercive measures against Venezuela, because considering Venezuela as a national security threat. The US actually like created the grounds for an eventual invasion of Venezuela. And of course, before that, one has to like morally assassinate the character of the Venezuelan people and government. So they did that. Thereafter, they started the sanctions started in 2016. So the first sanctions, like the broad sanctions, okay, sanctions is a wrong name. They should be called unilateral coercive measures because they're just done by one country. Of course, in this case, US and its vessels. So in 2016, the first broad unilateral coercive measures came against the oil sector. It was targeted to cause as much destruction, as much pain to the Venezuelan economy as possible. So it did that. And yes, from the 2000, if you look at, like, if you have looked at Venezuelan oil production, then you will see that there was a sharp drop in 2016 because Venezuela was cut off from the international markets, the international financial and commercial system being controlled by the US from a very long time, from the end of the World War II. So thereafter, there was like in 2017 also there were guarimbas, and then in 2018 in August there was an assassination attempt on President Maduro with drones, and that person, I mean the one who tried to kill that person, was later released in a prisoner exchange with the US. Then in 2019, in January 2019, began what is called the Project Guaido, in which just Juan Guaido declared himself the president, interim president of Venezuela, a figure that does not exist, a legal figure that does not exist in the Venezuelan constitution. It is something to highlight because it is not legal in Venezuela, yet he still declared himself. Although there was a government and the line of succession is president, then by executive vice president, then it passes over to the president of the National Assembly. So Guaido was not figuring anywhere. But at that time, in like starting from 2015, one must mention that the opposition had a majority in the parliament. It was the only time, like the only election that Chavismo lost in the last quarter century, and it proved very disastrous that it had lost. So taking advantage of that majority, Guaido declared himself the interim president of Venezuela, and that started what is called the extreme, like the very broad, comprehensive unilateral coercive measures against Venezuela by the US, the European Union, Japan, and many other countries, which included seizure of Venezuelan accounts, like foreign accounts in foreign banks, including the IMF, like Venezuela's special drawing rights were seized in the IMF. Venezuelan gold deposited in the Bank of England remains frozen. Venezuelan state accounts in the US. The countries like ours are forced to do these things. Like they have to have accounts in foreign banks so that they can actually access credit lines from IMF, from World Bank, and from other international or multilateral financial institutions. So all these accounts were seized. Not only seized, they were transferred to the US Federal Reserve. So it was a robbery of Venezuelan wealth, Venezuelan people's wealth, not even the government's. It's not the government's wealth, it is the state resources that were stolen by the US in broad daylight, and most people do not know about it. And thereafter, in February itself, there was an invasion attempt against Venezuela from Colombia with tanks. Of course, they called it a humanitarian aid, but it were tanks. So they tried to like forcibly overthrow the government. It failed, of course. Thereafter, there were again it continued. So it was a very long coup starting from 2019, continued well into 2020, 2021, and even recently. I mean, until Guaido left for the US, he was considered as the interim president. He was even being declared as president by many countries. And of course, he was not elected by anyone, but he was declared president. Thereafter, in 2020 also, I should mention that in May 2020, there were US mercenaries from a mercenary organization called Silver Corp that tried to invade Venezuela through the coasts of La Guaira, and they were defeated by the people there. So by the fishing communities on the Guaira coast, they first captured them, and then they were taken prisoners. Thereafter, they were again, like afterwards, during the pandemic also, I'm not saying that the coup attempts, etc. stopped. It was just that it went more towards a covert attempt because Trump had lost. Trump remained, but initially, like in the middle of the pandemic, he lost, and then the Democrats came in. So Democrats are always, they go for covert attempts so that people do not actually see their real face. In a way, they're dishonest in this. I call them dishonest. The Republicans are honest, more honest than them in this regard, that they want to invade a country. They say it. Democrats don't, but they still do it. Now, in However, I mean, throughout there was some sort of some sort of diplomatic back channel relations with the US during the Biden administration. There were some, the Venezuela, I mean, was allowed to have some foreign oil companies, including Chevron especially, but also other from Europe, to operate in Venezuela. They were given licenses by the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the US Treasury. So interesting, right? Thereafter, with the Trump administration, of course, all of these have gone downhill. And like Jesus just mentioned, in 2024, just after the presidential election of 28th July, so there was another guarimba, another coup attempt during the 29th and 30th of July. So of course it was put down within 48 hours, but it killed 27 people. So, and at the same time, there was what is called a massive electronic attack against the Venezuelan voting system. Not the voting system in itself, but the vote transmission and counting system, so that the National Electoral Council of Venezuela could not declare results as soon as it does in general. So it means that the result declaration was delayed, and in the meantime, the far right took advantage of this time to declare that their candidate, Edmundo González Urrutia, who has a very dark past in himself, but anyway, they had declared that this person had won. Very similar to the Guaido thing, that nobody elected Guaido, but he said that he won. In the same way, the far right declared that its candidate had won in the elections, and it was during these 2 days when there was all this attack on the electronic attack going on against Venezuela. There were also attacks of guarimbas in the streets. So I would say that despite all these things, it was in the 2019-2020 that was the most complex event, because there was like parallel governments. I mean, one existent and a non-existent, but there were at least 65 countries around the world, including the US, that had declared that non-existent government as the real government of Venezuela, and it actually it brought about the biggest sanctions, and not just sanctions, but also what is called a media narrative against Venezuela. That so it is from there that this authoritarian and all these narratives come from. The propaganda comes from that Venezuela is an authoritarian state. There are no human rights in Venezuela. In fact, the UN agencies, including the UN Refugee Agency and the United Nations Human Rights Council, were weaponized against Venezuela to create reports. I mean, very, very sort of like reports that are discriminatory against Venezuela, that do not really produce the real picture that is in Venezuela, or the real cause of the migration, which was caused by the destruction of the economy and people not being able to meet their basic needs. So these were not mentioned. The reasons were not mentioned. The Venezuelan government and the people were blamed for their fate. And I would also say that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, was also weaponized against Venezuela, with the far right starting a case. It's the Venezuela 1 case. It's still going on in the ICC. So I mean, everything, it was we call it a hybrid war, because that was the attempt, like that was how they tried to destroy Venezuela. So thereafter, I mean, however, those were, I mean, we talked about until 2024 July, both the covert and the overt attempts. Now, at the moment, the reason for which we are here is the current US military buildup in the Southern Caribbean, which is targeted at Venezuela. So at the moment, starting from August, it was declared in August, middle of August, it was reported first by media and later declared by the US authorities, including the Attorney General, that there has been a naval deployment against Venezuela to combat drug trafficking. So Venezuela is being presented as a narco-state, as a country that produces drugs and through which drugs transit. Of course, all these are not true, but this is a narrative very similar to the earlier narratives. And so at the moment in the Southern Caribbean, there are 8 US warships and a nuclear-powered submarine and maybe 1,200 missiles that are on the warships, and there are some 4,500 soldiers, no, including I think some expeditionary unit of the military of the U.S. military that was first stationed in Puerto Rico, and that can, at any moment that can come into the Southern Caribbean. And out of these 4,500 soldiers, at least 2,000 are from the special forces, and I suppose they had fought in Iraq, in probably, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, I am guessing. And then they were also sent, the US also dispatched F-35 planes to Puerto Rico. No, and these are like the bombers, they can bomb. So the idea is not just to, probably not to invade. 4,500 soldiers won't be enough to invade Venezuela militarily. However, the idea is probably not to invade Venezuela, as in general, it could be that there is something called in military terms, there is something called a decapitation strike, in which the idea is to kill, assassinate the civilian authorities of a country in order to create a crisis of governance, and also like panic within the population. So that can be targets, that can be the objective, we do not know, but this is the situation at the moment in the Southern Caribbean. And of course Venezuela is also there. They've been trying to counter this US deployment.
Yes, this is the part that I need to keep talking about. Now I'm going to explain to you the facts about the Venezuelan response to this reality that Saheli is explaining. And basically what the Venezuelan government did was it launched a militia enlistment that received a massive response from the Venezuelan people. And that's very important to highlight, because they don't show that too much in the mainstream media. Additionally, Venezuela deployed 15,000 more troops near the border with Colombia, and I believe that was an early strategy, plan along with Colombian President Petro to try to show an increased fight against drug, because in my opinion, President Petro is very progressive, but is a little bit naive, thinking that he can convince the US of doing something. And I believe that at that moment, when Venezuela announced this deployment of the 15,000 troops in the border, what the plan was that maybe Petro was pushing the US, or trying to convince the US to make some sort of joint anti-drug operation with Colombia, Venezuela, and, to try to divert this aggression in the Caribbean towards that. But that was not successful, in my opinion, and that's just my opinion. It's not, there are not facts about those things, or real official statement about that strategy. But when you read between lines, you begin to learn a lot of things that are not written. So after that, when the Venezuelan government realized that the U.S. government was not planning to do anything, any joint operation with Venezuela and Colombia, and they were actually planning a decapitation strike or any other sort of military aggression against Venezuela, Venezuela began doing these military drills in the Caribbean. And there's an upcoming drill that is about to begin soon in Sucre State. Sucre State is a state, one of those states in the east of Venezuela that borders Trinidad and Tobago. And the first small boat that was striked by the U.S. military allegedly originated from that part of the country. So there's this operation about to begin. I'm talking about a military drill. And also the Venezuelan government has been training militia, this new, basically since the announcement of this enlistment, at the announcement of the enlistment, President Maduro said that there were like 5 million Venezuelans enrolled in the militia. Like 2 or 3 weeks after the beginning of the enlistment process, the number raised to 8 million. And a few days after that, the Venezuelan militia, that is part of the Venezuelan armed forces, yeah, began these training exercises in the barrack. I mean, they basically brought the new enlisted militia people to the barracks to prepare them for combat. Train them in shooting in you know in anything related to a defense operation. And last week, the military went to the communes to do the same thing, but in the place of where the people lives. So that takes me to this part of, I mean, something that we call the fusion of the militia and the communes, you know, is this unity between the military and the militia with the communes. And the communes is an important part of the Bolivarian project, in which basically the states delegates a lot of its responsibilities to the people themselves, organizing communities in a way that we call communes. That initially, when Hugo Chavez was alive, we call the communal councils, but they have evolved to a new concept that we call communes, that is like some sort of association of communal councils to make a bigger entity capable of solving big issues. And if you ask me, this is one of the achievements of this particular situation that we are facing right now, which is that a lot of things that were planned before, Venezuela has been able to implement all this military training, all these projects of unity between the military, the militia, and the communes, and that strengthens a lot the capabilities of the Bolivarian Revolution. So what I'm trying to say is that this threat brings also opportunities. So we can pass to the next slide, Sahi. Okay. And here I'm going to talk about the relations of the far-right opposition on these current events. And it's important to highlight that in December, last year, in January this year, the far-right opposition launched this project called Ya Casi Venezuela. That's the name in Spanish for this fundraising that was aimed at hiring mercenaries to kill President Maduro. So that happened between December and January. Within the framework of that fundraising, and they announced, and Eric Prince was part of, the infamous Eric Prince from Blackwater was part of this initiative, and he said that it was necessary to increase the bounty on Maduro to $100 million in order for a mercenary operation to be successful. And that somehow explains why the U.S. passed in a few months from $15 million on the bounty on Maduro to 50. And right now there's this project, congressional projects launched by this far-right Miami Congressman Baralt to raise the bounty from 50 million on President Maduro to 100 million. So the idea is to put enough money out there for especially mercenaries to kill President Maduro. So that's the reality. I'm not exaggerating anything when I'm telling you all this information, But meanwhile, the far-right opposition gap, the gap of the far-right opposition with reality has been widening a lot in recent months, especially because of these recent attacks, where the far-right Venezuelans have not said too much. Actually, a few days ago, Edmundo Gonzalez, which was supposedly the candidate in the last electoral elections that we have last year, presidential election, he somehow said that the U.S. operation was necessary. So he was basically inviting the gringos to invade us in a video that he posted on social media. Additionally, we have been facing this threat together with this campaign of demonization of Venezuelan migrants in the U.S. And that has been accompanied by these forced deportations. And the worst one was the one in which President Trump sent 250 Venezuelans to a Salvadorian concentration camp, allegedly, I mean, accusing them of being part of the Tren de Aragua criminal gang without any proof or anything. And President Maduro was able to negotiate with the gringos an exchange in order to, after 5 months of those human beings being tortured, incarcerated without rights in El Salvador, President Maduro was able to bring them back home after a complex negotiation with the U.S. And it's important to highlight that the far-right opposition at that moment somehow applauded President Trump's decision to send those Venezuelans. So I'm just giving you some examples, just a few of them, of actions from our far-right opposition that has widening the gap between them and most of the Venezuelans and the Venezuelan reality. So if you ask me, I mean, the far-right opposition in Venezuela is in its worst shape ever, and they are now calling for protests on October 10. And I don't know who's going to be there. I mean, the last calls made by Maria Corina Machado, which is the highest representative at this moment of the far-right opposition in Venezuela, her last calls for protest has been a complete failure. But they are now calling for new protests on October 10, which is the day, by the way, where there was going to be celebrations in Venezuela for the canonization, you say that in English, of the first saint in Venezuela, which is Jose Gregorio Hernandez. It's something very big for Venezuelans, at least the religious Venezuelans, the Catholic Venezuelans. And of course, they are planning to do the protest those days because a lot of people are going to be in the street, participating in these, processions and events to celebrate the canonization of these Venezuelan saints. So they basically, what they want to do is to take advantage of the, of the crowd in the streets to claim that they are mobilizing Venezuelans. But anyway, that's basically what I wanted to say in this part.
Okay, so now we can probably move over and talk about that was inside what was happening inside Venezuela. Now at the moment, what is happening outside can also be mentioned, of course, and that is, so what is the regional context and the international context? Let's say the geopolitical context of there's all these threats of US invasion against Venezuela. So this situation is occurring in a period of what may be called a US decline. I won't call it a decline in such, but there are like signs of US decline. And at the same time, Trump is claiming some bombastic stuff such as annexing Canada, annexing Greenland. He has declared tariffs against almost everyone in the world, including the allies. And he has also threatened to take back the Panama Canal from Panama, although the fact remains that, Panama Canal belongs to Panama, but still then these things are happening. Nevertheless, it is in this situation that it's not like Venezuela is the only country that is being threatened with an invasion at the moment. It has also threatened Mexico. They threatened to invade Mexico because also with the same thing as drug cartels. Now there are drug cartels in Mexico, and those were created by the US. Let us not forget that the drug cartels were created at the time of the Mexican Revolution more than 100 years ago in order to keep like Mexico under US control. So the cartels operate with in complicity and as collaboration with the DEA and the CIA, FBI, everyone. So the situation in Mexico and the situation in Venezuela, of course, are different. Venezuela was never a drug producing state. So it is in this situation that this including complacent governments like Panama, like Chile, although Chile supposedly has a left government, it is not really a left one. So despite, I mean, these governments which had already been very complacent with towards US policies, they have taken a stand against this sort of US adventurism, military adventurism in the South Caribbean, because everybody is feeling threatened. So in a way, the puppet governments are a minority. There is, of course, one in Argentina, very unfortunately. There is in Peru, Ecuador, and some other like Trinidad. So Trinidad thinks that it is a big power and it has threatened to invade Venezuela, or threatened Venezuela, that it will allow the US to use its territory to attack Venezuela. Nevertheless, there are only 5-6 countries that have such governments. Most of the governments have taken stand against the US military buildup in the Southern Caribbean. CELAC, the regional community of Latin American and Caribbean states, which groups all the 33 states of Latin America and the Caribbean. The ALBA TCP, which groups the socialist and left governments of the region, and the governments of Cuba, Russia, China, Iran, as well as other countries, have actually declared their support for Venezuela. So Brazil, Colombia, the President Gustavo Petro has repeatedly, including in his UN General Assembly address just 2 days ago, he has called the strike extrajudicial killing of the Venezuelan and probably Colombian. There is also some there may be some Dominicans also in that, which like the 17 people who were killed. So he called it murder, and there were other people also who have called it murder, extrajudicial killing, etc. So all these government, Brazil, Colombia, they are taking a position against the US adventurism. So overall, in the international as well as in the regional scene, it's that Venezuela has support, at least diplomatic support, and quite open support. So it's unlikely that US would invade. However, after the US bombed nuclear facilities in Iran, I would say that nothing is impossible, because until then, at least nuclear facilities were off. I mean, they could not be attacked. They were sacred. But now everything is possible. That's just my opinion, of course. So the Venezuelan government itself is ready for everything. So it's not like they are not ready.
Yes.
And they have to be.
Now I'm going to talk about the expected versus the real effects on Venezuela that somehow I mentioned before, and a lot of analysts talk about that the US were planning to do something similar to what happened in Brazil in 1961 when they sent a fleet of US ships to Brazil, and they somehow push a coup d'etat in Brazil that ousted João Goulart, which was not a socialist, but a progressive president they had at the moment. And immediately after that, the coup d'etat happened. And then when a tough military dictatorship was installed in Brazil. And since that moment, a lot of people also mentioned the case of, the invasion of Panama when Noriega was president. But of course, in that case, way more troops were necessary, even for Panama, which is a very small country. So in the case of Venezuela, that is way bigger than Panama and more complex in terrain than Panama and more prepared, if you ask me, than Panama. Sahi, you moved. There we are. I mean, it's not going to be that easy for the U.S. to do something like that. But as Sahili said, the possibility of a decapitation strike is something that has been, you know, in the air for several months already, and it's something that the gringos are capable to do it because they don't have boundaries of any kind. They also were thinking that there was going to be social unrest or protests against Chavismo in Venezuela, and that has not happened, and it's not going to happen because Chavismo is a reality. It's not this communist authoritarian dictatorship that they talk about every second on mainstream media or from the West or from the White House in Washington. I mean, Chavismo is a reality, and a lot of Venezuelans are Chavistas like me. Or like Saheli, that is not Venezuelan, but you know, but she is a hardcore Chavista. So I mean, Chavismo is a reality that is very rooted in Venezuelan people. Of course, we have opposition, but as I told you, they are in the worst shapes ever, and social unrest is very improbable in Venezuela at this moment. They have launched social media campaigns that sometimes drive Venezuelan crazy. Just to give you anecdotal information. I mean, my daughter that lives abroad, a few weeks after this thing began, she called me and told me, "Listen, Daddy, I can buy you a ticket if you want to come here to where I live." So that's what I tell you this because I want to explain you that a lot of people are being psychologically affected by this social media campaign that the gringos are about to invade Venezuela, and that something very bad is going to happen. So that's part of the social media campaign that I'm talking about. Fake news has been happening in recent weeks, and I believe that are going to continue happening or intensifying the upcoming ones. They have been talking about desertion of top generals, and the Venezuelan government and the Venezuelan military has been showing that those desertions are big lies. But those campaigns touch the heads of a lot of people that do not dig too much, you know, looking for the truth, looking for the reality, and those campaigns are going to continue. They are launching also a campaign against the Attorney General office, that is an important actor in the Venezuelan state. So the reality is that right now there is great unity in Venezuela opposing this particular threat, you know, the possibility of a U.S. or a military intervention against Venezuela, and that have brought towards Chavismo a lot of forces that were not sympathetic to Chavismo, like opposition Venezuelans that are patriotic, and they align with Chavismo in the necessity of defend the sovereignty and the freedom of Venezuela, you know, amid this situation. So that's basically what I wanted to mention in this part.
But I'll just add a very small thing before I talk about this interesting development. However, the people who are outside Venezuela, if they're afraid, they have every reason to be, because the US has carried out decapitation strikes against different governments in recent times, or maybe the US, the arm of the US empire in Asia, which is Israel. It has carried out decapitation strikes against in Lebanon, in Yemen, and of course in Palestine. So it has taken out the civilian governments, all the entirety of the civilian government of Gaza. It has taken out a large part, including the leader of Hezbollah. It has taken out the civilian government, 10 ministers, and the prime minister of the government of Yemen. So it's not unlikely. I mean, people are afraid. They have reason to be, and the Venezuelan government is preparing. Otherwise, it would not be training its militia. It would not be calling for a massive enlistment in the militia. It would not be launching so many military drills, both in the sea and on land. Now, there has been an interesting, like, amid this psyop, no, so it's a hybrid word. So amid this psyop, there has been an interesting development, which has not been discussed a lot, but we thought that it should be highlighted. So it is an unusual partial narrative, like partial narrative alignment between Chavismo and the mainstream media in the West. So mainstream media in the US, including mostly the liberal ones like The Intercept and the New York Times and some others, they have actually criticized this, both the mass deportation of Venezuelans and Venezuelan migrants, and they have also criticized the US extrajudicial killings, these kinetic strikes on the boats in the Southern Caribbean, killing innocent people, civilians. So it's not like that. They are not saying that the Chavismo is good or Chavismo is not authoritarian. They are not saying that Venezuela is not a narco state. They are not saying any of that, because it's not like they have Venezuela's best interest at heart. But the thing is coming probably because it is a Trump government, and these liberal outlets are more aligned with the Democrats. So when the Biden administration, or before that, when the Obama administration were doing the same things against Venezuela, they did not say anything. And I also believe that during the Guaido period, although it was another Trump administration, Guaido, being a Venezuelan, like he was the face of that it was a proxy war against Venezuela. He was the face of that US war. So he, being a Venezuelan, no, the media, the liberal media of the US, it did not really, go against the Trump administration at that moment. However, now Trump is being very open and honest about it. He wants to invade Venezuela. He wants Venezuelan resources. So it is like it's not like that the liberal media really opposes or would oppose an invasion of Venezuela. They are just taking an approach against Trump as a person and as the Republican government, or the hardline Republican government that is in power at the moment. And we believe that this actually is an important opportunity for people in the global north to increase their international support for Chavismo, because even when liberal media is saying it, then there must be, like, there are people who believe. New York Times. So we believe that this is an opportunity that we can take. Actually, we can take advantage of this opportunity to get the message out and to strengthen international support for Venezuela and for Chavismo.
Now I'm going to talk about this fake U.S. war on drugs and what Venezuela really is doing to combat and fight narco-trafficking. So first of all, it's incredible, but the U.S. Department of Justice and the White House has been saying that President Maduro is leading the Tren de Aragua criminal gang, that they are trying to now make a cartel, a drug cartel, which has never been a drug cartel. It's just a small Venezuelan gang in charge of extortion and kidnappings and things like that. That was its specialty when the Venezuelan government crushed them a few years ago. And then most of them moved outside Venezuela, and they began dealing also with people, with people, trata de gente. How do you say that in English?
Okay, so they're smuggling. They're now smuggle migrants with the coyotes of Mexico and in Central America.
Exactly. So that's part. I mean, and they are
Human
accusing
trafficking.
human trafficking. That's the word that I was looking for. And they have been accusing President Maduro of leading Tren de Aragua, of leading the Los Soles cartel, which is something that is unexistent, but far-right Venezuelan activists and politicians has been talking about that for decades without any sort of proof. And they are even accusing President Maduro of being part of this link to the Sinaloa cartel. So is this whole Hollywood fabrication of an script against President Maduro to justify what they are planning to do? But in reality, Venezuela, the transit of drugs to the U.S. from Colombia to the U.S. through Venezuelan territory, according to UN reports, only represents 5% of the drugs that enter the U.S. market. In Venezuela has been explained that more than half of that 5% is being seized by Venezuelan authorities. Only this year, 60 tons of cocaine has been seized by Venezuelan authorities. Over the last 10 years, Venezuela has been down in like 400 something, almost 500 narco jets that use the Venezuelan airspace to traffic drugs. So Venezuela has never has been an important place for producing, having cocaine crops or producing crops also. And that has been stated in consecutive UN reports. And then we have this weird narrative about the U.S. war on drugs that no one that knows a little bit about history could believe, especially taking into consideration what happened in Honduras when they ousted Zelaya a few years ago, and then a few months later came Lobo to become the president of Honduras, and Lobo right now is in jail in the U.S. for drug trafficking. I mean, the U.S. doesn't have a problem having partners that are drug traffickers. The same thing happened right now in Ecuador with Noboa, the president of Ecuador, being the owner of banana companies that are used intensively by drug cartels to smuggle cocaine to the US and Europe. Colombia, in the case of Uribe, Álvaro Uribe was president in Colombia, and there are several U.S. Unclassified reports that mention that they knew that Uribe was linked to the Cartel de Medellín, and the infamous head of the Cartel de Medellín, I right now forget his name, but basically
Pablo Escobar.
Exactly. and there are several reports and unclassified documents accusing him of being part of drug cartels, and they don't and Uribe is one of the best political allies of the U.S. in Colombia. The same thing happened with the Contras in Nicaragua, with Plan Colombia. They invested this huge amount of U.S. dollars in the Plan Colombia, and the cocaine production in Colombia, instead of decreasing, increased exponentially when the U.S. entered Colombia with the Plan Colombia. So it's a big lie. Talking about that the U.S. is really trying to fight drugs. And another important thing is that the U.S. is a major consumer of drugs in the world, and no one does a real intensive, important work in the U.S. to combat that reality. And actually, also, the U.S. is the safe haven for drugs lords. The drug lords do not live in Caracas or Bogota. They live in Europe or the U.S., most of them. And money laundering is another important thing. The U.S. is the biggest money laundering machine. The U.S. banking system is the biggest money laundering machine in the world. And all international documents talk about that. So it's a humongous hypocrisy to talk about the war on drugs and then use it against Venezuela. Now we're closing.
Okay, we are close to closing, and yes, so among all organized crime, actually, I think it is drug trafficking is in the second position among all the organized crime in the world, in terms of money laundering, or in terms of the amount of money that it moves around, and all of it, like most of it moves, through the tax havens. In US, for example, there is Delaware, where a lot of within the US banking system, the legal banking system, the drug money goes and stays in that bank. So it's like the black money is being whitened. That is why it's called laundering. Like it's being washed into one, cleaned. And the same with Europe. So there are like Luxembourg. Like these countries actually exist to be drug havens. Tax havens. The tax havens exist for the drug money to exist, or to exist with impunity. So it's like the US is behind it. Like it's the US that controls the global financial system. So it knows, the US authorities know who exactly are the drug lords, where exactly their money are, who exactly to catch, to arrest, but they would not do that. So it's it's of course because it does not want to. The drugs are convenient. It is a convenient way of social control in the US. So you have all these like, I mean, I went and I saw actually drug addict people, and it's actually they have normalized it in the society. Drug addiction is normalized in the US. Of course, you people know better than me, but I was really shocked when I was there. And we'll just like go over to what is exactly happening with Venezuela or in Venezuela in regards to this. Well, I mean, it's just a sort of summary that despite the US hybrid war, and it is a hybrid because it has different dimensions, different fronts, despite that, the Venezuelan people actually are united in the defense of their homeland and as well as against against US empire or against imperialism and any sort of foreign threat. It was recently revealed that like only 3% of Venezuelans would support or welcome a foreign invasion of the country. So we can guess who those 3% are. And so that means 97% of Venezuelans are against any sort of foreign invasion. And it's not like 97% of Chavistas. They are not. It would be like half that quantity, maybe 55, 60%, maybe support Chavismo in some way, shape, or form. The others are opposition supporters in various way, shape, or form. And even then, there is the United States' threats of invasion actually, instead of creating social unrest or division within the society, has done the opposite. It has become a boomerang and has like solidified the unity of Venezuelans against any external threat. And the government has also declared that it is now in a phase of unarmed struggle. So unarmed struggle consists of both diplomacy as well as training its armed forces, including the militia. However, if there is an attack, any sort of foreign attack against Venezuela, then it will be upgraded to what is called armed struggle phase or the armed republic phase. So we hope that it does not go there, but it will. It might. I mean, even if it does, then the government is ready for it. So the Venezuelan Revolution or the Bolivarian Revolution is going from an unarmed phase to an armed struggle phase, which has also happened in the past in case of, for example, in Vietnam, where the US actually faced defeat. Of course, the Vietnamese people had to endure tremendous losses. Any sort of foreign invasion for any country entailed tremendous loss. But I would say that the revolution, the Venezuelan Revolution, is ready for that, although we do not hope for it. So it's, I mean, we are like, it's like the anti-imperialist spirit of Simon Bolivar, which Venezuela has been carrying on since like more than 200 years. It lives on in the Venezuelan people. It lives on in its militia, in its army, in its government, as well as the unarmed people. So, I mean, I would say that Venezuela will not fall. And however, it's not just Venezuela itself. Venezuela cannot be alone. It has to get support. It has to be like, it gets support from outside. Like, no, I'm not talking about military support, but also of ideological and solidarity support. So there have been solidarity events held across the world, including in Europe, including in the US. Even yesterday, there was a solidarity event, or on Thursday, sorry. There was an event on Thursday where the Venezuelan foreign minister who was attending the UN General Assembly, he went to the solidarity event to just as it was a bridge between the progressive movements in the US and the people of Venezuela, the Bolivarian Revolution. And this has been happening in many places. So it's just that this support, this visibility is what is essential at the moment. Any sort of solidarity is welcome. All solidarity is welcome. So with that, we would probably like to end this thing. And we are ready for any sort of questions or anything that there may be.
Thank you both so much. This was a wonderfully rich conversation, and you shared really important information. What I'd like to do is maybe pick up on one of the important threads and then frame a question for you. The thread is the extent to which the war on drugs is one of the principal kind of ideological tools that is currently being used to wage the imperial war, or intensified, I should say, against Venezuela. I really appreciated the ways in which you frame this in order to understand how the war on drugs actually operates, or a war using drugs as a tool of counterinsurgency. I would add to many of the important comments that you had the excellent work of Alfred M. McCoy, The Politics of Heroin, CIA Complicity in the Global Drug Trade, that goes into great detail about the involvement of the US in the global drug trade, not recently, but for decades and decades. And of course, the great Gary Webb did the Dark Alliance series for San Jose Mercury News, which uncovered a lot of the Contra crack cocaine controversy or dealings that were being referenced. I think it's also important to insist on the extent to which the drugs that are then brought into the United States, with the oversight of the intelligence services, are used very explicitly as a counterinsurgency tactic. And in fact, there are members of the US government that are on record stating as much. John Ehrlichman is perhaps the most famous. He was a Watergate co-conspirator. And he mentioned regarding the Nixon White House that they had two principal enemies, the anti-war left and the black people. And he said, this is a quote, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did," end quote. Right, so you see here clearly a member of the US administration. Of course, this is more dated, but I think this continues unabated, really taking the position that the use of drugs for counterinsurgency is really integral to fighting social movements and anti-imperialist struggle on the home front as well. So those were just some kind of general comments to insist on the importance of the framing that you're giving us in order to understand that the real war on drugs is a war being waged by the imperial powers in order to foster global drug production and use it for counterinsurgency and pro-imperialist agenda. It's not what's being done by those anti-imperialist states like Venezuela that are actually waging a successful war against this global campaign of using drugs to undermine people power. The question that I had, though, was more specific, and that was the role of both regional allies in supporting the Venezuelan struggle, as well as the kind of broader geopolitical sphere. You mentioned that, of course, Venezuela has expressed interest in joining BRICS. Brazil obviously was hesitant to allow that to happen. But with the emerging multipolar world and many signs that the US empire is certainly not as strong as it once was, what are the overall changes that you see both regarding regional alliances and the kind of geopolitical chessboard that could favor Venezuela's struggle to continue to develop its sovereign Bolivarian project? And a final kind of add-on question is, what can people do in the imperial core to support the struggle that is for Bolivarian independence?
You want to go first, Sergio, or me?
Okay, so if we talk about, I'll just say about the regional front and let Jesus talk about geopolitics as well as what people in the global north can do. So in case of the regional front, I think what happened with the allowing or not allowing Venezuela to join BRICS with Brazil, the situation currently has changed. So at that time, both the Colombian government and the Brazilian government, I'm just mentioning Colombia because is also important, although it's not part of BRICS. So both of them had tried to align or sort of like take a middle ground, try to appease the US government, and at the same time maintain their sovereignty. So we don't know why. Of course, there are different diverging forces within these governments, right? So they sort of tried to appease the US government or the US authorities and at the same time maintain their sovereignty or not being attacked by the empire. They thought that by attacking the targets of the empire or not being friendly to the targets of the empire, they could save themselves. So this idea actually exists. This is also a part of the US PSYOP, the empire PSYOP, still it exists. However, just afterwards, just after that, no, it was Brazil itself has been attacked by the US. Not just, there has been the Bolsonaro trial going on, and Bolsonaro has been declared guilty of a coup attempt. So he is a friend and asset of the US. So there have been there is unprecedented interference against the Brazilian judiciary and the Brazilian authorities regarding this thing, interference from the US. So the Brazil has learned that, I mean, Brazilian authorities have learned that appeasing the empire would not protect them. That is one. And then there is also the tariffs. Like Brazil is one of the countries that are receiving the highest tariffs from Trump's tariff wars. So appeasing the empire does not work. They learned it. So that situation has changed, and I believe that at the moment, if Venezuela, like next time if Venezuela applies for joining BRICS, I don't think there would be any opposition coming from Brazil. So very similar to the situation in Colombia. Like there have been the governments of Venezuela and Colombia are friendly, like current government, not the earlier ones, but still there have been sometimes there have been a tide and web in the relations. So at one moment, the government of Colombia was trying to support Venezuela. Initially, they tried to support Venezuela when this U.S. military buildup started to grow, because Colombia is also threatened. Now, thereafter, a little later, he tried, like as Jesus mentioned, Petro tried to turn it into a joint Venezuela-Colombia U.S. military operation against drugs, which did not happen. And at that time, he was trying to again protect the his own government by talking something about human rights in Venezuela. Thereafter, the government of Colombia itself is now targeted. So its election is it has elections coming up next year, and that is being targeted by the US authorities. There have been like the assassination of a right-wing politician, but that is there are attempts to use it against the current government of Colombia, and there are like coup attempts against Petro, many coup attempts against Petro himself. So he also knows, like he has understood that being, trying to appease the empire would not save him. And I would also say that situation in 2019 and the situation in 2025 are very different. In 2019, most of the continent, I mean the South America and Latin America, most of the continent was right-wing, had right-wing governments. I mean, not people are not right-wing, I'm not saying that, but most of the countries had right-wing governments. They had supported the Guaido project. They created the Lima group to like being a regional attack dog against Venezuela. Now that does not exist anymore. So although there have been like sort of backwardness in terms of politics in Argentina, which is very unfortunate, as well as in Ecuador. So these two countries, we lost them from the pink tide, both the first and the second. I mean, the first they were, in the second they are not. Nevertheless, some important allies like Colombia, the most important ally of the US in Latin America, is no longer so appeasing towards the US. The same with Mexico. Like when Jesus was mentioning all the drug precedents of Latin America that were imposed by the US, there was Felipe Calderon, who we missed. So Felipe Calderon never won an election, but he was imposed by the US on Mexico as the president. He stole the election from AMLO in 2006. So, and they're also, they had District Plan Colombia, they had Plan Merida, which was the same thing in Mexico, and it actually like a sort of for the two governments after that, the government after that, meaning Peña Nieto, Enrique Peña Nieto, both governments were very appeasing towards the US. So, nevertheless, in 2018, the chessboard has changed there also, and the current government for Mexico, although it tries to sometimes appease the US, it's not exactly like that. It has reinforced its sovereignty. So you have that. You also have like Honduras, which in 2009 its government was overthrown. Now Juan Orlando Hernandez is in a US prison accused of drug trafficking, although he was a US asset at one moment. So we have all these countries that were at a moment fell to US empires, either coup attempts or of covert attempts. Now they are not like that. So the regional chessboard has changed. There is not as much support. Again, there's as much support for US covert or overt operation, coup attempt, invasion, regime change operation, whatever it may be called, against Venezuela as it was in 2019. And Venezuela has itself recovered economically. I'm not saying it has gone back to 2015, 2014 or before that. So it's not like that. Still, it has recovered. The people are not really going for an unrest. The situation of unrest could have existed in 2019. It no longer exists now. So it's not exactly, this regional chessboard is not exactly what was in 2019. It's not as bleak. So Jesus will talk about international one.
Yes, basically the balance of regional balance of power and the political violence climate, I mean, has been shifting towards, I wouldn't say the left, but towards a more sovereign and anti-US interventionist or military operations in the region. And that's something positive from the perspective of us in Venezuela, for us in Venezuela. Internationally talking, we have the support of China and Russia, which are extremely important international partners. And Venezuela have is among the few countries in the world that have I don't remember how you say that in English, but all weather relations, I mean strategic relations with China and with Russia. We also have extremely important and fluid relations in all levels, and the same thing happened with China. It is an economic relation, but it's also scientific. It is also military relation with both countries, and that's extremely important for us. Not thinking in the chessboard perspective, post-Second World War perspective of this country will ally with this one and this country will send troops to the other country. I believe that those things do not happen anymore, at least in the way they happen like several decades ago. But I'm of the opinion that we can count on those countries if something really bad happen in Venezuela. I mean, talking about the U.S. aggression, the BRICS thing is another important reality that Saheli touched, and is also important for us to be part of BRICS. But it's important also to recognize that the BRICS is not the solution to all the problems in the world, and actually BRICS is a very complex, politically talking entity, and it's conformed for governments with very complex politics and diverse. So you cannot think that all the countries on BRICS will, support a socialist project or anything like that. But anyway, I mean, I believe that's important to mention the relations that we have with China and Russia, and talking about the importance for solidarity movements in the face of this aggression. I believe that is extremely important, as we already said, and we need to take advantage of this partial alignment of mainstream media in its anti-Trump tirade to take advantage of that in order to show the world that it's not true all the lies that they say about Venezuela being a terrible model, authoritarian communist dictatorship, failed economic project, or whatever, all the things that they has been building for years, and most of them are a consequence, especially the economic one, of the U.S. sanctions, of the U.S. aggressions against Venezuela. So I mean, it's important to let the people, like organizations like yours, Gabriel, push this, approach, trying to show what in reality happened in Venezuela, because it's extremely distorted in the U.S. what happened in Venezuela. And they try to say that Chavismo is non-existent. And when they say that it exists, they misrepresented and they put us Chavistas like some sort of cavemen that don't understand what happened in our country, or don't understand what happened in the world, and that don't care about human rights and the well-being of the people. And it's actually the contrary. So anyway, I mean, I believe that it's important to highlight those things.
Thank you so much. Actually, that segues very nicely with the one other kind of two-part question I wanted to ask you, and then we have at least one question from the chat. I have always been very both intrigued and impressed by the dominant discourse coming out of the Venezuelan government concerning fascism and the way in which fascism isn't simply described as something that existed in the past in Nazi Germany or something like that, but is often identified as a current historical phenomenon and very specifically identified with US imperialism and the attack on Venezuela. So I don't know if you had anything that you could share with us, because we've done other webinars on fascism and understanding the contemporary rise of fascism. Raúl Antonio Capote, the Cuban intellectual, has published a very important book entitled Guarimbas, where he begins with Venezuela, but then also it's really an analysis of fascism as the kind of cutting edge of contemporary imperialism that takes on a lot of different shapes and forms in different parts of the world, but is really driven by the search to intensify capitalist social relations and imperialism and beat back the, people power or the struggles for sovereignty. And conjoined with that, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the current functioning of the communes as a kind of both anti-fascist and anti-imperialist force within Venezuela, and how significant the work being done in them is insofar as it's empowering general civil society and democratic structures that allow for people to mobilize on their own, and obviously in, coordination with state forces, but really creating a kind of mobilization of society that goes far beyond the kind of stripped down formal pseudo democracies that are prevalent within the imperial core.
Let me begin, and then I pass the mic to Sahi. Uh, mm, Talking about anti-fascism is something that we have learned from experience, as you say. I mean, through the fascist far-right violence that we have been living in Venezuela since Hugo Chavez took power. We have been learning through all these years that fascism is the driving force of most of these violent, protests and guarimbas and situations that we have been facing for more than 2 decades, and that Sahili mentioned briefly when she was talking. And for the last maybe 1 or 2 years, maybe 2 or 3 years, the Venezuelan government has realized, and um, associated. I believe that we see clearly now this connection between this far-right violence and fascism. And for that reason, the Venezuelan government has been organizing international congresses and events, trying to bring intellectuals from different parts of the world to try to address this issue and to study it and to try to frame it. And I believe that that's extremely important, especially taking into consideration that right now in the U.S., you are about to face this new Antifa tirade with these recent comments by President Trump. Somehow, no comments. Actually, there was already a statement by the White House somehow framing the Antifa movement as something close to terrorist organizations. And that's going to bring a lot of noise in the coming months, if you ask me, because that's like a new marketist tirade that's going to be used to frame whoever is a little bit progressive and frame it as a terrorist or something like that. So that's part of the issue. And I believe that for that reason, it's extremely important to keep pushing again about the importance of anti-fascist organization, anti-fascist theory, and I hope that we continue doing that. In terms of the communes, I believe that we have been experimenting in recent years more deeply into this concept that I mentioned, you passing from the communal councils to the communes, and we have been organizing in recent years these popular consultations in which the communes themselves select the projects that they prioritize to receive funding from the state, and and that's an extremely important experiment that empowers these grassroots organizations that, if you ask me, are the core of any socialist project, real socialist project that aims at giving power to the people. So it's extremely important what is happening in Venezuela. These interactions between the militia, the military, and the communes that we have seen in recent weeks in Venezuela, for me, are extremely inspiring, because the U.S. threats have pushed to advance faster towards a direction that was not seen a few weeks ago. And I mean, I never envisioned that the military was going to the communes to do military training in the communes, and that they were going to appoint speakers from the communes to participate in the militia organization. So that is happening right now, and I believe that despite it not being perfect, because nothing is perfect, I believe that the power that the Venezuelan government is putting on that project is extremely important. And actually, we has been thinking, and President Maduro has been announcing for the last few months, that we're going to have a constitutional reform soon in order to give a better constitutional framework for the communal project to develop in Venezuela, and that includes also the electoral system, So yes, a few answers to let Sahili talk a little bit.
I think you have covered mostly everything, right? So it's not like it's only that the constitutional reform that Jesus said. So Venezuela currently has like 5 powers of state, but the idea is the idea of the constitutional reform is that the communes themselves will be like there will be a communal power as the 6th power of state. So communes will become a part of the Venezuelan state. It will not just remain like grassroots organizations, because like Chavez said, it is like Chavez used to say comuna or nada, like either communes or nothing. So that is the slogan of the Bolivarian Revolution, and I believe that with the incorporation of the communal power as the 6th power of state, that could be like a way of realization of that slogan.
Great. We have a question on the chat from Peter, who says, I wonder what effect Colombia's more lefty government has had on cocaine trafficking in the Americas. Colombia seemed to be the most loyal henchman of Uncle Sam in Latin America. I know you talked a little bit about this before, but perhaps you could go into greater detail about having a more leftist-oriented government in Colombia.
I can say something about that. I mean, actually, President Petro has been talking recently, since the U.S. announced the desertification of Colombia. Actually, they didn't desertificate Colombia. They explicitly desertificated President Petro. Actually, it was more an attack on Petro than an attack on Colombia. If you read the letter of the desertification, itself. So, but anyways, President Petro since then has been very clear about his efforts to eradicating illegal crops, and he explained a few days ago that the plan of eradication was of 30 million hectares, I believe, and that they reached only 11, but the year haven't finished yet, so the plan is not going badly. I'm talking about the chains of illegal crops in Colombia towards different crops in order to fight, the cocaine production. He talked recently, a few days ago, about the amount of drugs that they seized, and they has been seizing more drugs since he took power than even before. And I mean, he was explaining in one of his recent speech how the Colombian government, his government, in these latest years has been fighting drugs. So if you ask me, I believe that since President Petro took power, the level of fight of drugs in Colombia have really increased, and it's something absolutely understandable because the previous government in Colombia has been partners with drug traffickers. That's a reality. In Colombia, I mean, President Petro is the only socialist president that Colombia has had ever in its Republican history. And for that, he's been demonized by some mainstream media, by the White House recently. And I admire President Petro because he, despite being in Colombia, is capable of doing what he's doing. I criticize some things of Petro because I believe that he's a little bit naive sometimes, thinking that he can please the gringos and be good, as we say, with Dios and con el diablo.
Yeah.
We say in Spanish, you know, like be in good terms with the devil and with God. But that's impossible. I mean, you never can do both things, and that has happened to us in Venezuela. And if you really want to do something for your country, you sooner or later will learn that you are only capable, you will be only capable of doing that, not depending on the decisions that are imposed on you from abroad, you know? So that's what I wanted to say. Sahili, you
So
can.
there is a little bit of issue also, like in Colombia, for example, there are 9 US military bases in Colombia, and everywhere where there are, I mean, the US military bases, apart from keeping a country under submission, also function as drug trafficking, I mean, transit points. It is true in Peru, it's true in Ecuador. I mean, Ecuador currently does not have a military base, but when it had, those used to be the transit points of drugs. And in Colombia also, it's not like the US military bases has been of any good to Colombia, either in the measures of security or in terms of drug fight against drugs. It has actually been a fight against poor people, which Petro has also highlighted. He said that the people who are killed in the war on drugs are the poor people who do not have any other way of earning a living, and I mean, they're the easiest victims of drug traffickers because they are just being used as the mules to traffic drugs from one place to another, and they are the ones who actually who put the bodies, so they are the ones who are being killed. And he also, in another interesting thing that he has, but it is a liberal turn of him, that he was for the legalization of drugs, not all of them, but some of them. So probably I think marijuana would be one of them. So he said something interesting in his UN speech also, when he was talking about these drugs and the US war on drugs. He said that wine and all alcoholic drinks, they are not considered poisonous, although they are for the body, but they're not considered poisonous because they are produced in the north, they're produced in Europe, they're produced in the US. On the other hand, the drugs like cocaine, etc., they are produced in the south. And not just cocaine, I mean, marijuana is also produced mostly in the south. So they are, I mean, depending on where a drug is produced, it is criminalized or not criminalized. It is either celebrated or demonized. So that could be a liberal turn of him, but he is also very insisted on the fact that that in order to fight drugs, really a real war on drugs should be the elimination of poverty and upliftment of the people in general.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'd like to uplift the statement made by Terry Brown in the chat. He just says, great analysis and information. So thank you so much. The information war is one of the very important fronts of struggle, and Orinoco Tribune is really at the forefront of that fight right now. So please keep up the excellent work. For everyone listening and viewing online, please support the important work that's being done. Inform yourselves about the real war on drugs, or the real war with drugs, and support the struggle for Venezuela to maintain its independence and its sovereignty. Are there any final statements, Jesus or Saheli, that you'd like to share?
Okay, so I
No,
would
I just
just like
want
to thank you,
go ahead.
thank you and Critical Theory Workshop for this platform that you gave us, because we are trying to reach newer and newer audiences all the time, just because that's like you mentioned, in order to take the information, the real information to people, so that they actually understand that mainstream media does not tell them the truth about anything, not even themselves.
Yes, and I just want to thank you for the invitation, and thanks Saheli for making the bridge, and to let you know that we try in Orinoco Tribune to present a different perspective about what happened in Venezuela from what is presented in mainstream media, and that we have been trying, that we have been doing that for for more than 8 years already, and that we plan to keep doing it. That we are volunteer-based organization, but that we need support, financial support and donations from people in the North. So I invite you again to support the work that we do. That I believe that is extremely important. And thank you
Absolutely.
again, Gabriel.
No, thank you, and I second that. And in the chat, there is the direct link to the donations page. So, and I look forward to collaborating again in the not so distant future. So we'll end the live stream now, but thank you so much. Keep up the excellent work, and we'll see everyone next time.
Sorry for being so pushy, Sahili, with the timing.